And we are recording. Dave Meldrum!
Katie Tuckling, it's great to see you.
Do you know, we haven't been in the same physical space for 10 years and you haven't aged a bit.
Well, if you could see how much hair I don't have, I think you would take that statement back. I have aged.
It's the noble art of the razor, isn't it? The shorter the hair, the younger you look for longer. That's what I'm aiming for. We met on the Arrow Leadership course that CPAS run with St. James of Lawrence. I still have post-it notes in dedication to James Lawrence, and you'll know why.
You still have your socks? You still have your socks?
Dear. Death by post-it notes is great. And we learned a huge amount on that course about leadership, about ministry, about ourselves as a group and individuals. I'd love James to do another one in the light of COVID. Leadership during lockdown would be really good. But it was great when you saw our other interviews and you said, actually, you know, if you have me, I'd love to do one, because your narrative is slightly different. Your context is completely different from all my other interviewees. They are all white middle class English and in English parishes. You are somewhere very different. Tell us about where you are in the world and your home life and your ministry.
Well, I am personally white and middle class, that I can't deny, but I am 10 years ago, around the time we first encountered each other, we moved to Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm the minister of St. Peter's Church in Mowbray, which is a small-ish Anglican church, Anglican, but has a slightly unusual legal relationship with the diocese. So I'm paid by the local church rather than diocese, and we have a bit more freedom in terms of what we can do than maybe other Anglican churches. But we're in a fairly urban part of Cape Town, not far from the university. And we are in a very diverse area, both ethnically and economically. And we have just passed 10 years here.
And home life has changed substantially for you as well in that 10 years, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. So where are we? Over 4 years ago now, we started fostering 2 children who we are now in the process of adopting. And in that time, another child has joined us he was 17 when he joined us, but we've known him for a long time. So he joined us as a fostering placement at age 17, and he's now 19, but we view him as our son. And the other 2 were in the process of adopting. So yeah, family life has completely changed in the last 10 years. So
completely.
Yeah, it's a journey.
That's quite a thing. And how have you found, and we'll move on to like the logistics of lockdown in a minute, but how have you found moving from being this kind of forming family and learning how to be around each other, and then having parents of children that you haven't had since babies, so you've kind of picked up the story partway through and you're now forming your own story, and then kind of not in the middle of all this because you're fairly established as a family, then comes coronavirus, which has, you know, is challenged even the most long established of families. How have you found family life has adjusted and warped its way around the coronavirus stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of our approach to fostering and adoption in general, we realised, I think, quite early on through mistakes, as we all learned, that one of the most important things was not to have expectations of what we thought family life should look like. So, of course, it's very easy to want to say, oh, we're going to sit down as the perfect family around the dinner table and, you know, have dinner at 6 o'clock every night. But the reality is that with kids who have been traumatized and have come from very difficult backgrounds, and many of whom have never kind of formally sat down to meals in that way before, that's just not going to happen. So we've always had quite a loose family structure since we started learning that lesson. So I suppose we tried to take that into lockdown and have sit loosely with our expectations, and I think that has helped. It's been hard for the kids in different ways. It's been hard for every kid, I'm sure, but all our kids in different ways come from very difficult contexts and pasts where they've experienced loss of different types. So the awareness of this virus that kills people and changes the shape of their lives brings with it insecurity and anxiety. and a shaking of the normal circumstances of life for them. So change is difficult for that sort of person at the best of times, and this kind of imposed change was hard, and we've had to just give each other permission to have difficult days and to, be angry that this is happening at all. And I think in giving ourselves permission to do that, adults and children, then we found a way to be together that's, I hope, fairly healthy. Not that it's easy, but I think it's the important thing has been to give ourselves permission to find it difficult. Yeah.
Permission to say this is really tough and that's okay and we're in it together, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how did coronavirus kind of make itself known for you guys over in South Africa, and what happened in Cape Town in terms of a reaction by the official government, local church? How did it all kind of come about that you ended up shielding in the lockdown?
Yeah, so as a country, we're kind of in a different space to where you are in the UK, so that the peak is still ahead of us. Seems to be the generally accepted truth in terms of numbers of infections and deaths.
Okay.
So we went into lockdown maybe 2 weeks before Easter, so that must be middle of March. I think like all of us, time has lost meaning over the last few months. But
it's a year ago.
Sometime around. And at that point, there were infections around the country, but it wasn't kind of anything like the scale that we'd seen in other countries.
Yeah.
But the decision was taken by central government to put us into lockdown, and that was something we had 3 days warning about. And I know that hasn't been the case in other countries.
Wow.
And that idea of giving warning has both its good side and its bad side. But that's a decision that was taken. But it was an extremely strict lockdown, far more so than many other countries. So. Borders were completely shut. Cross-province travel was not allowed, so you couldn't go from one side of the country to the other. Any unessential business was not allowed. You weren't allowed outside the house for any sort of exercise at all, and so on. And the purpose of that severe lockdown that early, I think, was to allow the country's fragile health system to prepare for what is likely to be ahead.
Sure, not be overwhelmed by it.
Yeah, and that in that respect, there was a degree of success around that. Sure. What has subsequently happened is, I think about 3 weeks ago now, roughly, the lockdown level was lowered, so a bit more has been allowed. You were now allowed out to exercise during the day. I should have said during the more severe part of the lockdown, there was a proper curfew. If you're on the streets after 8 o'clock, you could be arrested.
Okay, so that was extreme.
But now, so we're in this slightly less severe part of the lockdown, even though infections are spiking and deaths from the virus are spiking.
And you've not yet hit the peak.
We've not yet hit the peak. So the rationale behind it is to get the economy back in some kind of state, although the South African economy was fragile at the very best of times before this happened. So we'll see. I have problems with the approach that's been taken for a number of reasons, but we'll see how it pans out. We don't really yet know. Certainly the health system is under huge pressure. So we'll see how it turns out.
And speaking of health, who was it in the household that triggered the need to go beyond lockdown and to go into shielding mode?
Yeah, that would be me. So it's all my fault. I have a disease called ankylosing spondylitis, which is both hard to spell and hard to live with. It's actually not as rare as people think it is, but it's basically a form of arthritis of the spine, which is probably degenerative for most people, and causes huge amounts of pain in both the back and many other joints, but also a huge amount of fatigue. And essentially what it is, the disease is a misfiring of the immune system. It's what's called an autoimmune disease. So to treat it, to manage it, we have to suppress the immune system, essentially turn off the part of the immune system that is misfiring.
Yeah.
So when I was first told that, 10, 12 years ago, whatever it is, I remember thinking, I'm sure I need my immune system for something. The doctor was speaking to me, and she said, yes, you do. So, yeah. And it turns out, yes, we do need our immune systems for
They're
something.
quite helpful, yes.
Yeah, to protect us against a virus like this. So if I were to contract coronavirus, it would be potentially very dangerous for me. So that means that I had to essentially be pretty much isolated, and people around me have to take more precautions than they would otherwise.
So you're not shielding as a whole house, you're shielding and your family are minimizing contact. But I know your eldest is still going to work one day a week, so that must be quite a balancing risk with mental health, I guess.
Yeah, so he is going to work once a week, but I think he kind of understands the need to be sanitizing his hands and everything when he comes in and all of that. So yeah, like you say, it's a balancing act. We all, in a situation like this, have to make our choice between quite how seriously we take it, or maybe that's not the right phrase to say, quite how much isolation we're going to go into. Because like you said, our mental health is also vulnerable, and that's a real live issue for all of us. So we probably don't be quite as cautious as we could be, but we're more cautious than many people are. I think it's
that risk management, that balancing act between the risk of catching it and then the risks involved with being so isolated from everybody else that your mental health just disappears out the window.
Exactly.
Yeah. And how about ministry and church life and parish and congregation and the wider kind of church structures? How has that been impacted by you being under lockdown?
In terms of our local church, in terms of the understanding that I need to be isolated and protected, the local church has been great. They completely get it. And I've been here 10 years, so there's a good core of people who've known me for those 10 years and who understand my health issues, which has been great. And wardens who are also represent my employers in this regard, very clear about, we don't go back to services in the building until you, Dave, feel safe to go back in the building with us.
That's quite reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. Obviously, kind of day-to-day ministry is completely reshaped because I'm not leaving the house. So there are some stuff continues, but over Zoom like this, some pastoral work. But there are many in our community, our church community, who don't have the economic or educational capacity to use technology this way. So for them, it requires me or others actively checking in on them a lot more often than we would otherwise be doing. And I don't think we've always got that right as a local church, but we're trying to. Communication in a church community is always hard. But when we're all even more separated from each other than normal, then it's much harder. There's
relationships that rely on physical proximity being tested. Yeah.
Exactly. We haven't gone down the live streaming route for services. WhatsApp has always been kind of the technology that most people are most comfortable with here, I think, certainly in our area. So I've used a broadcast list for years now to communicate notices to the church on WhatsApp, and I simply, at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning when we would otherwise be having services in the building, I send out the service liturgy and links to lyric videos of worship songs or hymns on YouTube and so on. I send them out in real time at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning as if we were gathered together. And I've pre-recorded a sermon that I've uploaded to YouTube, and that then goes out during the service and so on. So people can take part together at 10 o'clock or later in the day if they want to or whatever. And that has seemed to work for most people in our community. That's worked reasonably well. There's always things we can hone or do a bit better, but yeah, it's been challenging.
And that's got longevity, isn't it? Because that we were reflecting before we started recording that I remember my ordaining bishop said that ministry is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you set off at 100 miles an hour at the beginning of any project or any ministry or lockdown and thinking, how do I do church in an online space? If you set off at a sprint, you're going to burn out. If you go at a marathon pace and pace yourself and don't run too fast at the beginning, you'll discover you've got enough resources to keep going. And I think you're reflecting on that in terms of your observation that a lot of clergy sprinted at the beginning of all this and then hit a kind of burnout critical point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my videos for sermons have a quite low production value, I think would be the technical way of putting it, which is in a sense deliberate. I mean, my skills are limited in terms of editing video anyway, but we could do more. But I did take that decision early on. I'm not trying to build a social media following through this. I'm not trying to be a successful online church in regards of being viral or whatever. I'm trying to create a context in which we serve our church community. And we are quite a messy church anyway. We are quite a kind of non-professional church in the good sense of that. You know, our services aren't slick on a Sunday morning anyway, is what I mean by that.
Yeah.
So why should our videos be that of our sermons in this context? So unless, you know, I've forgotten to press the record button for a sermon, I only tried to record the sermon the once. And if the dog happens to appear briefly, then the dog has appeared briefly in the sermon. You know, because my sermons on a Sunday morning, I only have one shot at them.
Yeah,
when I deliver them anyway. So,
yeah, exactly.
You know, so, that's been a deliberate decision that I've taken, and it may mean that we don't get any more views for our sermons than we would have listeners anyway. But I don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. Yeah.
You're not there to become the next YouTubing vicar. You're there to serve your congregation and the wider community. Yeah. And how about, I'm going to mention the G word because, you know, we're both priests and we're both Christians, so God has to get a mention somewhere.
Yeah.
Where or if have you seen God in all of this? Someone I was talking to said, when I asked them off camera and we left it in terms of recording, we didn't come back to it on record. I said, you know, where's God been in this? And they said, God hasn't been anywhere near. There's been a vacuum. And if I re-find God at the end of this, I'll be very happy. But at the moment, there's no sight or sign of him. So it prompted me to ask all my interviews really, sort of, you know, do you find God in this, farther away, closer, and more of a mystery, more clear? Yeah.
I think, speaking for myself, the answer would be all of those things.
Yeah.
My mental health is a bit fragile for me anyway. So that the effect of that on my spirituality and my faith walk, I think, is that I tend to go in waves in terms of my relationship with God, you know, and that gets exacerbated in circumstances like this. So I think, like probably a lot of people, my experience at the moment is some days I have great days where I don't snap at the children at all, or and God is very close and it's all sunshine and rainbows and unicorns, and there are other days when it is really painful and difficult and it's a vacuum and all of that. And I think, like I said at the beginning, in relation to how we in the family cope with lockdown, I think there's a similar dynamic here, to give ourselves permission to have a good day. If it's a good day, that's okay. Even if other people are posting on social media or saying to us they're really struggling today, it's okay for you to have a good day. Or if I'm really struggling and we're seeing others doing really well, it's okay for me to be struggling and to feel far from God. Because God is in those rhythms somewhere, actually. And it's okay we don't have to have it all together all the time.
I guess it models to other people who are also going through those ups and downs and close proximity and God is far away, to say that if we as ministers understand that because we're living it, then it gives permission to other people to say, okay, good, it's not just me. There's people out there who understand.
I think that's right. And kind of hopefully for a long time now throughout my ministry, I've tried to model something like that, partly because of my own health issues, and say, I don't have it all together, and there are days when I am here at church despite the pain I'm living in, physical pain. And it's hard for me to be here. Now, that is hard for some people as congregants to hear, because a lot of us, well, all of us, I think, instinctively want our spiritual and other types of leaders to be strong and decisive and in control. And that's understandable. It's a very human thing, but it's not a helpful thing, because, Jesus cries on the cross, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" So if Jesus does that, then it's probably okay for me to be in pain and to say that. So that's what I've been trying to do. It doesn't mean I get it right, and there are some things that are inappropriate to say and do and be, and sometimes we all cross those lines. But that's been and continues to be my general approach.
Some of the folks I've been talking to on social media and also in these interviews have, one of the commonalities has been a feeling of being invisible, of being kind of missed, whether that's, we have the daily briefings with Boris Johnson or one of the cabinet, usually not Boris, and when you're sort of listening out for the shielding category, so what do shielders need to do? How does it impact shielders? And the word shielding very rarely appears in our daily briefings, and certainly in terms of official government statements, official advice, people contacting you, as a patient to go, this is what it now means for you, and church advice. It all seems to assume that everybody is relatively fit and healthy, not particularly vulnerable to this, and therefore the advice is for those people, and shielders are the forgotten category. Is that the same for you over in Cape Town?
Yes.
Okay.
The use of the word invisible, I think, is very pertinent. So kind of mental health issues, which we were just talking about, they're invisible issues. Ankylosing spondylitis, which I have, is an invisible disease, in that I could be in huge amounts of pain and literally unable to get out of bed, but I can't show you physically why that is the case.
No.
And this need to shield and isolate is also invisible. You can't say, look, this is what the virus looks like. I can't show you a bit of the virus and why it's physically so dangerous. So, that invisibility is a real experience for me. In all honesty, I struggle as I sit here to remember a single senior church leader talk publicly, and I'm talking both here in South Africa and elsewhere. I struggle to remember any of them talking about clergy who are physically vulnerable themselves. Unless it's very, very, very throwaway comments. And that does lead to that feeling of invisibility. And when that happens, it causes me concern that there are clergy in my position who may then feel that they have to put their health at risk to do their job. And I'm worried that is happening much more than it may be otherwise. And that concerns me greatly.
So what's got you through this? What sort of tips have you got, apart from the dog? What tips have you got for not just surviving being a shielding clergy and household, but thriving? What top tips have you got for other people in our position?
I think some kind of routine is helpful, but a routine that you cut yourself some slack with. So, if you get it wrong, you get it wrong, and, don't go easy on yourself. So whether it's trying to get up at usually the same sort of time, set my alarm, even though there's objectively not much of a reason to do so most days. Have some kind of routine in the morning, which I've managed to find one that works for me in this strange reality. And do the things that feed you on any given day, that bring me joy. That I have the physical and emotional, spiritual energy to do whatever that is each day. And it's because it's something that my therapist has drummed into me over 6 or 7 years now. Be kind to yourself. If in doubt, just be kind to yourself. Whether that's to treat yourself to something, whether it's allow yourself to have a sleep, or whether it's just to give yourself permission to have that difficult day. And I keep repeating it because it's probably the single greatest lesson I've learned over the last few years is be kind to yourself, because God is actually quite kind to us. While we need to be serious about our sin and our failure, we need to be serious also about God's grace and kindness extended to us. So we need to extend that to ourselves as much as we do to others. So my therapist, who wasn't a Christian, once said to me, would Jesus talk to you the way you talk to yourself?
Ooh.
And that was a light bulb way of putting it for me.
That is quite a bombshell to end on, isn't it?
It is, yeah. But it's a very healing thing to take on board. Jesus wouldn't talk to me the way I have habitually talked to myself. He would most of the time be kinder towards me than I've been. So if that's Jesus's way of talking to me, then I could probably learn from that.
Well, on that bombshell and wisdom, and I'm going to have to go and ponder that. We could do a whole series just on that. How do you talk to yourself?
I can't claim it for myself. It's
No, but that's huge. How do you talk to yourself? And is Jesus sitting there going, "You're saying what?"
Yes.
I think we'll end the recording there. Dave, before I hit the end of recording, thank you so much for being one of my interviewees and giving us.
It's a pleasure and a joy. It's really great to see you, Kate.
And sharing, it's good to see you too. So I shall hit end of recording and see you soon.